Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us on the Nonprofits. Today's Friday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. But not such a happy story. If you tuned in to our show on Wednesday, 2 days ago, then you saw us discuss really horrific conditions concerning young children and how they are impacted by religion. We are going to move to Australia with yet another example of how young kids can become the unfortunate victims of religious extremism. And AJ is going to take it away.
So in Australia, 14 members of an extremist Christian cult were found guilty of manslaughter following the death of an 8-year-old girl named Elizabeth Strauss. She had type 1 diabetes, and her parents, guided by other cult members, including the leader, withheld her insulin, opting instead to pray for her healing. This led to her tragic death after 6 days without essential medical care. She died in January 2022, but the court's recent verdict held all 14 individuals accountable for their roles in this preventable tragedy. This story is from The Friendly Atheist by Herman Mehta on January 29, 2025.
Yeah, thank you for that. So sad to lose such an innocent kid, not even having the decision to make her, or excuse me, having the authority to make her own decisions about her own medical care. Relying on your parents who withhold and ultimately lead you to your death. Rob, I'm not sure that I understand why it was only manslaughter. Can you talk a little bit about why it wasn't just plain murder? How did we end up with a manslaughter verdict?
Yeah, so when I read in the article that the parents were charged with murder, and in the end, all 14 people were convicted of manslaughter, and in the verdicts it says charged with murder, convicted of manslaughter, I was like, what? How? Because another thing to say before that, this had already happened. She was sent to the hospital and was I believe she was in a coma, but she was hospitalized and they had a scare with her diabetes prior to this, not even that much not that much before. So this wasn't new. So when I discovered that it was manslaughter, I went into the 69 page document to try to find the verdicts. And I found it on page 21. So I just want to read it. So ultimately, they were convicted of manslaughter because of deeply held personal religious beliefs. He says, after consideration of the whole of the evidence admissible against Mr. Strews, the father, there remained a reasonable possibility that in the cloistered atmosphere of the church which enveloped Mr. Strews, and which only intensified once he made the decision to cease the administration of the insulin, he was so consumed by that particular belief in the healing power of God's promoted by its members that he never came to the full realization that Elizabeth would probably die, believing instead that God would not allow that to happen. So it was impossible for him to ever be charged with murder despite any education that came before, because it should have happened in the first place. Mm-hmm. It should have happened even if the first time she went to the hospital didn't occur, but it makes no sense to me, and in fact must be true, that they went to the hospital, was told what would happen, and then they didn't believe it. So therefore my beliefs affect the law about how severe that is. That's actual insanity. I'm very upset at this, mostly because when I first took my notes on this fucking thing, I was like, oh, there must be some definition of manslaughter versus murder in Australia that means that they couldn't have been charged. No, he just believed real hard, and therefore it is not murder.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they've been through this before. I mean, they should be held to a higher standard, having already received care. And my question would be, what does this say about their God if in the first place, because we're talking about a story that took place a couple of years earlier, they had to bring their daughter to the hospital anyway? I mean, if they thought God was so powerful, why did they have to bring her to the hospital to begin with? And then, yes, at the hospital, they should have learned what was going to happen if this continued, and it did continue, and then they were let off the hook. And I think it just goes to show that for some reason, religion gets a special place, and it really damages people. It destroyed this young girl's short life, but it certainly destroyed the parents. And Helen, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit on that note, because you do a lot of work with recovering from religion, and you come across people who have been badly damaged. How does this story resonate with you based on some of the people that you have worked with?
Well, this story really like affected me, not only as an advocate, but just as a parent.
Yeah.
But I've heard stories that are far, like, they didn't die, but of not getting proper medical treatment. Believing in faith healing, instead of getting like mental health treatment, people believing that they had demons inside of them because they had like autism, or they have like some kind of medical condition that needs to be expelled from their body, rather than getting like medical treatment for these things. And this is what belief does to people, because you can believe in a God. I don't fucking care. But when it gets to the extreme where you're not giving people like proper medical treatment, that's when this has gone too far. Because, like, as Hemant pointed out in our article, like, one of the basic things you do as a parent is keep your kids fucking alive. And the fact that they were told by medical, like, you need to give your child your insulin. This needs to happen. And they were still like, nope, God's going to heal her.
Yeah.
And guess what? She died. And that's what happens, because when people, and it does real damage, because let's just say she had survived and somehow, still grew up in these extreme religious beliefs. As she got older, maybe she wouldn't, and it wasn't as extreme as this, where, she had type 1 diabetes. Maybe she had some kind of other disease where she's not going to get proper medical treatment, until that other education and that other information becomes available. And you also have to accept evidence. And that's the thing about like extreme belief and not being able to see the forest from the trees, and believing in the power of make-believe, like believing in the power of magic is just insanity.
Yeah. And there's, the fact that they knew enough already to go seek life-saving medical treatment in the first place should completely keep them on the hook for repeated abuse. In fact, if this were me, I would lose my mind if my kid was sick. If there was nothing that I could do, I would do everything that I could do. And they didn't. Yeah. And they were found guilty, and they had a slap on the wrist. But AJ, is it only the parents and the other family members that were guilty, or is there a larger cause at play here?
I think it might be the system as a whole. Obviously, the whole cult, it was like 20-something people in that cult. I'm not sure we could blame the medical professionals here, but somebody in the law-making process messed up here. As Rob mentioned, this wasn't the first incident that happened, all right? She, when she was about 7 or 8, about 5 months or so before she died, she had fallen into a coma as well, because it was exactly the same thing. They prayed over her, they denied her insulin, she went into a coma, and she went in the hospital. She weighed 29 pounds at age 7. That's like the weight of a toddler, all right? And she spent a whole month in the hospital recovering from that. At that point, her dad was sentenced to 6 months, but I'm not sure what the reason was, but he did not serve any time. And the mom was sentenced to 18 months, but she served only 5. As soon as she got out of prison, she was put on parole. They did the same thing. Elizabeth died only 23 days after her mother was released from jail. All right, so they did the whole thing again. They learned nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't learn anything. And you know, Rob, I want to go back to legal definitions and responsibility, and talk to you about how should the community or the people of Australia in general feel about what the legal system is saying is allowed. I would say that children, the legal system is signaling to people that their religion is more important than the safety of their children. And I would not feel comfortable in that system. I don't know. Your thoughts on that?
More specifically, what the legal system is saying, because in America, in most first world places, that your intention has a big part of the sentencing. So what this is saying is that what you believe will happen is more important than what does happen. And that's materially different from intention. Your belief is different from your intention, because I'm not a lawyer. If I intend to kill someone in America, then that's murder, because that's my intention. Now, if I intend to do huge amounts of great bodily harm, but like really just believe that God's gonna keep them alive, that would probably still be murder, because like I'm intending to do things that would result in death. Whereas this is different. This is your belief structure said that they won't die. So that's the problem. It's like, yeah, it's going to affect the kids. It's going to affect literally everyone, because now a person's personal belief about what should happen due to Magic Land has more import than what the rest of reality has told us. That's actual insanity. Yes, someone failed her in the legal system before she got there, and the judge failed her after.
Yep. And I think the medical community might have failed her as well. Because of the already documented treatment and lack of care, if you will. Helen, I want to talk to you about maybe the lack of education, the lack of medical understanding, or maybe even a failure of the medical system. What can we say about those things and how they could have been used or not used to prevent this young girl's death?
I really wish, I'm sorry, that maybe Child and Family Services, after the first incident, was keeping a very, very close eye on this family. I think that was a failure of the system, because they knew that this was an extremely religious family. They were all part of this weird ass cult, and that believed in divine healing, which isn't a thing. And the child had been back in the hospital because they weren't getting insulin, and they got really sick. And just a short time later, the child died. So that was a failure of the system.
Rob, jump in. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I just want to agree with you. Yes, it's worse than that, right? Their belief actually is irrelevant. Their church doesn't matter. Child went to hospital because they were unwell, then was immediately hospitalized again for same thing. Doesn't matter what their church says. CPS should go, this is a pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's been other incidences of other, like in the United States, where people that were had extreme religious practices, families, then CPS got called because they're like, hey, their beliefs are now causing harm to an innocent child. There's been court cases for blood transfusions for Jehovah's Witnesses for children, where doctors hire lawyers and go to court being like, if we don't medically intervene, this child is going to die. So that is a failure of the system. 1. 2, I am sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Actually, there are 3 other states. When I was researching this case, there were 3 other cases, one in Oregon, one in California, and one in Texas, where type 1 diabetic children died because of the exact same thing: faith healing, being refused insulin, and dying of ketoacidosis.
And that's the thing. We always say, like, your belief is, you can believe whatever you want, but you swing your arms until you hit the tip of my nose, and then we're going to have a fucking problem. Yeah. And the thing is, though, is that the swinging of the arms caused children to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem with, like we were talking about with the Bangladesh story. Like when people have these extreme beliefs, children get hurt.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm
Helen.
sorry, like your main job, one of your main jobs as a parent is to keep your child alive. And how do you keep your child alive? If a child needs some kind of medical treatment, you get your child the fucking medical treatment. So I'm sorry, I'm just very angry about this whole thing. This is so fucked up. It's so
Religion
fucked up.
is like,
I want to read this right now. I just want to read what the judge said is that so they were talking about the husband and wife. As with her husband, the complete abdication of Mrs. Strutt's part of the legal duty she owed to her daughter constituted such an egregious departure from the standard of care a reasonable member of the community would observe in the same circumstances as to amount to a crime against the state that is deserving of punishment. Again, like her husband, when her conduct was viewed objectively, it must be seen as having involved grave moral guilt and disregard for human right. Now, do I think that she should have prosecuted them for murder? Yes.
Rob, let's jump over to Rob. He had an injection.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I got feelings.
No,
it wasn't an injection. It was just like, hey, but you want to swing your arms until the tip of your nose? But Helen, if I intervene in the swinging of your arms, then I have impeded some of your rights to harm someone else. Wouldn't that be wrong of me to stop you from being able to harm others? That would be unjust.
So I want to take I have a hot take, and I'm not taking side. I'm not trying to sympathize with the parents, but I want to look at this from an even more strategic view, if you will, a larger step back. And let's just look at how religion impacts people. First of all, it comes for the children first. It always does, right? The children are usually the biggest victims, but those that make it to adulthood lack the problem-solving skills, the logic to act like normal human beings. I mean, not only did they lose their daughter, they refused legal representation. Now they only got the slap on the wrist, which I am dumbfounded by, but I mean, they believed that God would save their kid, and then they waltzed into church on murder charges and decided God would protect them, and so they didn't need a lawyer. I mean, this is insane. The things that religion makes people do, not only to their own loved ones, but to themselves, is asinine. AJ, go ahead.
That's what blew my mind, okay? Like, they saw this child go through a whole month in the hospital recovering from the first incidents, right? And then she gets out of the hospital and mom gets out of jail, and they're like, oh, hey, you know what? Let me try this a second time because it didn't work the first time, so maybe it will work the second. Okay, I have type 1 diabetes too. I have my glucose meter and my insulin pump on this side. It keeps me alive. If I take this off, I will probably die within, a couple of days. Probably less than that. So here's the thing. Type 1 diabetics don't produce any insulin. Insulin is like a key to the cells. It opens the cells, the glucose gets in, and it gives you all the energy that your cells need to survive. When this process is broken, when you don't have insulin, is horrible on the body. Okay, like you are going to suffer from extreme thirst, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, fatigue, confusion, headaches, muscle pains. This child went through that horrible suffering for 6 days at home, and they didn't take her to the hospital. They just continued to pray. It's like the massive amount of mental gymnastics that must have gone through there. It's just so hard to believe that people can do that because of their religious beliefs.
Yeah, and on that note, we're gonna wrap up the show. I'm gonna open it up if anybody else has anything they want to add. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Excellent discussion, guys. really heartbreaking, and thank you guys. I love the emotion. I love the heartfelt kind of relation to this girl who will never know us. But you know, people should know that there are voices out there, people like us, speaking up and trying to make the world better for you, and still giving you room to practice whatever religion you want. Just don't hit the tip of our nose. That's all. And if you want to hear more stories about us fighting for your right to worship, but our right to exist without your worship, then keep tuning into the Nonprofits. And don't forget to check us out Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays at 7 p.m. Central on YouTube. And click one of the links below.